Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Batman: The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke graphic novel has always been problematic, and because it's always been problematic, that's why they've kind of run into a problematic problem with this adaptation, and namely that they decided to change the context of it by adding an intro section, a different story starting off the film before the actual Killing Joke. And while that is noble and I think addresses the biggest problem people have with this story and what the context of basically the rape of Barbara Gordon represented within that story and the major complaint of this, and although that might be from noble type of ideals to change that, the Killing Joke graphic novel is told in this movie pretty much word for word. It's a very faithful adaptation when it's actually doing the Killing Joke. So acting like the section at the beginning of the film will change what that original story's about and empower Batgirl more is very naive and completely misunderstanding the Killing Joke story as it is in the graphic novel. Had they maybe added a different kind of prologue that actually added to what was actually going on in the story, they kind of try to right a wrong with the Killing Joke, and everyone from feminist critics to Alan Moore, the actual writer of the original graphic novel, have criticized what happens to Barbara Gordon in the original graphic novel. And I think the idea of it, sure, it came from a nice place, but their actual way of adapting it ruined that from ever happening. So the idea of doing this intro section doesn't really make a lot of sense. It makes sense in a way to appease people, but from a storytelling angle, it just doesn't really work. Now, as two separate films, I don't really mind them. I don't have like strong feelings of hate even towards the Batgirl story. It's just something that emphasizes the part of the Killing Joke that makes it so sensational. Before I'd read the Killing Joke graphic novel, I remember someone telling me, oh, well, it's the one where Batgirl gets raped. And I think that's how most people know it. And people go, oh, why is the Killing Joke such a big deal? And they're like, oh, well, it signified a change in comics because Joker rapes the shit out of Batgirl. Rather than saying, well, it adds a level of complexity to a villain superhero archetype, and the structure of the actual story is interesting, and actually what the story is about is interesting, and it signified a change to more grown-up audiences. I think this kind of shows the problem with the story is that that's what everyone's takeaway of the Killing Joke is. Whether you hate it, whether you like it, whether you're kind of okay with it and you read it once, that's why you're probably reading it. That's what you're initially told about it, and it's really one of the biggest problems with the Killing Joke. Rather than coming up with a different way to adapt it or doing something like that, they kind of tried to take it in a new direction, but in a way they emphasized it in all the wrong ways and kind of emphasized how everyone kind of takes the wrong thing from the Killing Joke and almost seems to misunderstand what the actual story is about, just taking the most shocking element from it and thinking it's about that, instead of understanding what Alan Moore, Brian Bolland were really trying to do. Even if what that was problematic, they're misunderstanding the story in itself. It's kind of the problem with how everyone views the Killing Joke in general. The Killing Joke is two stories. One is about Barbara Gordon as Batgirl, who is helping out Batman defeat a gangster who's coming up in his crime family, whose name is actually Paris Franz. Batgirl is trying to investigate Franz and what he is doing and what he is doing to the gangster empire and how he's about to start a gang war or some relatively ego-related things and cause more crime. It's very much focused on Batgirl's story as you understand how she views Batman and how she wants to stop this crime, even though it is obviously messing with her and becoming far too personal. And the second part is a very faithful adaptation of the Killing Joke, where the Joker has escaped from Arkham Asylum, sets up an amusement park, goes to Jim Gordon's apartment, shoots Barbara Gordon in the stomach and cripples her, kidnaps Jim Gordon, and then puts him on a very horrific amusement ride to kind of break his sanity and show every man could go as mad as the Joker is, as Batman tries to figure out what happened to Jim Gordon and stop the Joker's evil plan. Killing Joke, the story, is really about Batman and the Joker, and Jim Gordon as well. And and this idea that the Joker thinks that anyone could be like him, and understanding the origin of the Joker, or how the Joker at least understands his origin to be. He is an unreliable narrator, and they don't really get into that as much. They leave out certain elements of the graphic novel, but it kind of gets into kind of the nature versus nurture argument, or fate versus free will, or whatever you want to call it. It's not really, and I think most people would agree, Alan Moore's best story. You know, Watchmen probably is, or League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, or even I think From Hell is probably a little more interesting. But as a Batman story, it's kind of one of those that everyone always talks about, The Killing Joke. But I think this story at its core is about Batman and the Joker and Commissioner Gordon and what the Joker's trying to do with his evil plan. And unfortunately, part of that evil plan is he shoots Barbara Gordon and breaks her back, and it's very insinuated, although it's not explicitly stated, at least in the graphic novel, that the Joker rapes her, although later in the film it's semi-insinuated that he plausibly did, but we don't know that. That's a horrible thing that they just kind of take a character who has such a rich history and obviously has certain feminist ideals and has a lot of little girls who grow up loving Batgirl and looking at her as a role model, and having the whole criticism of women in refrigerators that various comic books and movies have been criticized for, and that's pretty much what The Killing Joke is doing. And the whole idea of trying to changing that should have been done in a way to adapt this story maybe from Barbara Gordon's perspective, had they actually done that. Maybe that's a better idea for a comic rather than making The Killing Joke movie. And I think that's kind of the thing with having that before. It makes it important for you, it makes it personal, and I understand what they're trying to do, but they should have emphasized maybe a prologue that showed the Joker's history with Gordon, and how when Gordon's making his scrapbooks, it almost feels like maybe they should have had Gordon making these scrapbooks and like seeing Joker come in and out of prison, and maybe the Joker understanding who Barbara was and how she was important to Commissioner Gordon all throughout these years, or even having the Joker, when you understand how his wife, who was pregnant with his kid, had died, how that kid could have been the same age as Barbara Gordon, or something like that, to really both emphasize the conflict between Batman, Commissioner Gordon, and how Barbara Gordon fits into all that. But they don't do that. They just focus on Batgirl. I appreciate that they tried to do something about the criticism of The Killing Joke, but if they're really going to do The Killing Joke, and they do it fairly faithfully, and I'm sure if you get this on Blu-ray or DVD, you could just skip the Batgirl thing entirely if you wanted to, if they do the chapters. I saw this in theaters, so I don't know, but I assume they would. I think if you did it that way, you'd probably be fine with it, and I'm not exactly sure what the motivation was to add that extra thing. Was it so they could play it in theaters? Was it because they thought no one would buy a Blu-ray or DVD for something that's about 45 minutes? But would I have preferred a good 45 minutes? Yeah, I think I would have, and I could have just thought about how problematic that was, and maybe that would have started a better discussion rather than to kind of shield us or empower Barbara Gordon more, rather than in a situation where she is tortured and maimed in such a way that many of her male counterparts wouldn't. I think there's certain times where you can do certain things that are progressive, are things that should be happening in modern society, and those are good things for cinema and animation and storytelling. And then there's other times you do things and it just doesn't really work, and I think with The Killing Joke it doesn't work. But I also think the problem with this is they should have maybe warned us a little, and it feels like this thing came out and then we're like, say what? There's an intro. And also the whole ideas of Batgirl having sex with Batman, and I think a lot of that has to do with how we view Batgirl, and how we view Batgirl more as like Batman's kind of daughter, the idea of the Bat family, of Robin being the son, as Batgirl being the daughter, so forth. And I don't think it was necessary for her to have sex with Batman. I mean, we literally get to see in one movie Batgirl get penetrated by both Batman and the Joker, which that was a thing I needed, I guess. It brings up a lot of issues in how we view Batgirl and how we view her relationship with Batman, and almost how, like, you know, it's okay for Catwoman to be with Batman, but it's not okay with Batgirl to be with Batman. And the idea of like an adoptive family, you know, Batgirl obviously isn't Batman's actual daughter, but the idea of if you view someone in that father role, and is that in a way in itself incest, even though they are not actually related, and so forth and so on. But it's also like, I think that was kind of just a mistake in a story, and had that that not been in there, it would have been just a fine Batgirl story. It didn't really seem to add too much. It didn't really work for the film as a whole. As a story, it wasn't as good as The Killing Joke, but it also didn't really work with The Killing Joke. They didn't like complement each other. They weren't two stories that should have gone together. It just was a little odd. Like, why add this extra story? And it also kind of doesn't work because, you know, you see things like the Batman Year One DC animated movie, and that's a fairly faithful adaptation. And we've seen these more faithfully adapted Batman stories into animated films, and so I think we kind of all thought The Killing Joke was going to be like that, and to kind of branch off from that all of a sudden kind of makes you go, what? Why did you do that? And it's odd. And also the idea that you're seeing these voices who, like Tara Strong, who did Batgirl in the original Batman the Animated Series, Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, and having iconography from Batman the Animated Series, and having all those things, and then having those characters have sex. They obviously knew what they were doing, and they're kind of playing off our preconceived nostalgic notions of these characters, and doing those things puts you in a psychologically odd predicament, because you are thinking like how this is like semi like incest and the Bat family, and what does this mean, and like just because she's Batgirl, can she have a relationship with Batman, and all this psychological crap that I did not need, and I don't think anyone needed, and I don't think really worked for the story as a whole. I think what they were trying to accomplish was something they couldn't accomplish, because The Killing Joke is what it is, and unless you're going to adapt it in a different way, which clearly you were not, this story had no business being in front of it. Now, The Killing Joke, I think the idea of Batman and the Joker and how it's about their relationship together, or almost the Joker's relationship with Batman, and how they have to be kind of together. And even at the end, as Joker's like done probably one of the worst things he's ever done, specifically to Batman and Commissioner Gordon, they still have this like chummy relationship. And I think it kind of adds to the fact that Alan Moore in his original story and in the screenplay almost addresses the fact that they're going to be back together. They're going to fight each other again. And the idea that he keeps saying like one of them is going to kill the other one, but it almost feels like that's all just talk. And they're still going to be kind of like they're like workplace chums, but they'll never admit it. I don't know, that end scene has so many meanings about those characters. It's very interesting, and even when I read it, that's probably the part I remember the most, is the end scene of those two talking. That's one of the things I always thought that was odd when I read the graphic novel. It's like the rape part doesn't seem to be what the story's about. It's about Batman and the Joker and their relationship between the two. Had they done something that addressed more of that, that's what the story is. Now, I'm not trying to marginalize rape, and I think it is a serious issue, and there's great films about it, particularly Outraged by Ida Lupino and Something Wild, not the one from the 80s, but there's another one from the 60s, and those are both excellent films about rape. This is a film in which a rape occurs, but it is not a film about rape, and it was not a graphic novel about rape. It is a graphic novel in which that is part of it, but it is about Batman and the Joker. It is not about just the Joker raping Batgirl. It's just that's what this has become about, and because of that, they just thought, I guess this is what it was all about, and I think that was a mistake. But I also, you know, I kind of prefer Death in the Family, to be honest. I think that's a little stronger of a story. I kind of would have liked that. I don't know if they're going to do that or not. We'll see. I did like seeing Mark Hamill as the Joker again. He does an amazing performance. I liked hearing Kevin Conroy again. Kevin Conroy to me is the Batman. No one does Batman better than Kevin Conroy, and no one does Joker better than Mark Hamill. And of course, Tara Strong as Batgirl does a really great performance as well. I don't know if this had just been The Killing Joke, I would like it as much as, like, I think Year One's probably one of my favorite of the faithful DC animated adaptations, and I don't think this even comes close to that, and I don't think Year One itself would have come close to that. Trying to change the story is something that should have been done in a different adaptation. Maybe having The Killing Joke be from Barbara Gordon's perspective, or telling her story of that and her becoming the Oracle, and this kind of tries to fit that in there, but it just doesn't work. They didn't change it enough. You can't do a faithful adaptation and try to change the story. That's just such a misunderstanding of storytelling. Animation wise, it is a little choppy in some places, and other places it can be really well animated, and I'm not sure what that's about. It's kind of odd, because in some places I'm like, why does this doesn't look as good, but then in other places, like the fight sequences would be really good, particularly the fight scenes with Batgirl in the opening sequence. Part of me thinks maybe the big deal of The Killing Joke almost ruined it, but if you enjoy The Killing Joke, I'm sure you'll like Batman The Killing Joke, and you'll like what they did, at least with the parts that are the actual Killing Joke. But I think the Batgirl thing was a major miscalculation, and the Batman and Batgirl sex part I don't think really helped the story. The Batgirl thing just did not work with the Killing Joke. And although it's a fine little mystery in itself, and I don't really think that Batgirl became Batgirl just because she liked Batman, but it is unfortunate that it focused so heavily on the sexual relationship and takes a character who they wanted her to be more than this victim of being objectified and raped and broken as just kind of being a symbol, and then used her in a story that kind of maligns her. So the empowering element I don't think worked as well as they thought it could, but I thought Tara Strong still did a good performance. As a mystery it kind of works, but the Batman sex thing really complicates things. It really doesn't help the story. If it had just been a mystery, I bet people would have been a lot more forgiving. It almost like the Barbara Gordon Batgirl first part has the same problem the Killing Joke does, whereas the rape in that thing kind of overpowers everyone's memory of the rest of the story. In the first thing, her having sex with Batman overpowers the rest of that story as well. Most people seem to be happy with it who left the screening but didn't really love it. I like the Batgirl story, but her relationship with Batman was odd. It just didn't really seem to fit the character, and some of it I think comes from our preconceived notions of these characters, but it's really selling it on our preconceived notions of these characters. So it's like you're asking us to loosen up, but you're also saying like, hey, here's all the familiarity you have, and even the Killing Joke's playing off of our preconceived notions of these characters. So having an opening thing with Batgirl to like do something new with her character, I don't think was necessarily the right thing, and that it didn't really add things to the Killing Joke that worked for it. It didn't really understand the Killing Joke as a story. It made it about just this one rape scene, and just like that scene of Batman and Batgirl having sex on the roof, scenes of various sexual penetration of Batgirl kind of ruin any sort of storytelling for most people. It was unfortunate they did that in the original Killing Joke, but that is what you're adapting, and you need to go full tilt if you're going to do a very faithful adaptation and understand what you're adapting and tell a story that works with that adaptation, especially if you want to make it longer. Not putting in a different story to kind of make that mean more or make the emotional stakes mean more, not make it just a simple plot point. They complicated an issue that was already fully complicated, and I think the Killing Joke was not a missed opportunity because it did the Killing Joke, but I think its opening was a major miscalculation over what they needed to emphasize and what the story was about, the problem with the Killing Joke and what everyone remembers about it, and not the thing of what the story's about. More of a rookie mistake, but done by people who are much more experienced, so it's not as embarrassing as I think a lot of filmmakers. But even though their heart was in the right place and they're trying to change one of the more horrific and considered lower points of Batman and comic book history, it just simply really wasn't going to work, particularly the emphasis on Barbara Gordon. They needed to think about what the story was about, not what people told them the story was about, or how people told people to read the graphic novel and what they said the story was about. They needed to actually look at what the story was about, and the story unfortunately wasn't about Batgirl, and trying to make it about Batgirl, even if it was from a good place, just simply wasn't going to help make the Killing Joke any better and any less problematic, and ended up making this film actually problematic story-wise and not working as well as it could have done had they just made a very faithful adaptation and left it at that. So if you have seen Batman, the Killing Joke, and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.